Wyoming Territory, 1887. Elias Ward had been in Red Willow for 3 hours and was ready to leave. He was not a man who enjoyed towns. He had grown up in them well enough, had spent the first 20 years of his life navigating the specific social machinery of small communities in the Wyoming Territory, who owed what to whom, which names opened doors and which closed them. But that had been before his brother died and left him the ranch, and in the 4 years since he had learned to prefer the company of cattle and fence lines and his own silence. Reflective, he had what he came for: flour, salt pork, 2 boxes of ammunition, a new axe handle, 4 blankets rated for hard winter, and a sack of coffee beans that would last until March if he was careful. Red Willow had what he needed and nothing else he wanted. The town felt tighter than usual today. People moving with the specific quality of folks who know something is happening and are either involved or deliberately not involved. He loaded the wagon, checked the harness, climbed onto the box. He was reaching for the reins when he heard it. A sound from the covered section behind him. Fabric shifting. Someone, adjusting their position against the wooden side. He got down. He walked to the back of the wagon. He pulled the canvas flap. A young woman was sitting between the flour sacks and the blankets with her knees drawn up and a small bag clutched in both hands, and an expression on her face that was trying to be composed and was not entirely succeeding. She was 22 years old, or near enough, dark curling hair coming loose from its pins, brown eyes that were doing the specific calculation of someone who has just been caught and is deciding in real time whether the person who caught them is a danger or a chance. Her dress was pink and simple, and had a small stain at the hem that was still damp. She had been running recently. He looked at her for a moment. She looked at him. Outside, somewhere down the main street of Red Willow, he could hear the sound of horses moving at the particular pace of men who are searching for something. She leaned forward slightly. "Pretend I'm your wife," she whispered. "Until we're out of town." Elias Ward looked at this woman he had never seen before, hiding in his wagon between his flour and his blankets, with the sound of approaching horses getting louder, and a small bag in her hands, and the specific desperation of someone who has run out of options and has landed on a stranger's wagon as the last remaining one. He did not know her name. He did not know what she was running from. He knew the sound of horses moving like men looking for something, and he knew what it meant when someone was hiding. "Get down," he said. "Lie flat. Pull the blanket over." She did it without a word. He closed the canvas. He walked back to the front of the wagon. He picked up the reins. 3 of them. They came from the north end of the street at the pace of men who are being thorough rather than urgent, checking wagons, looking in doorways, the systematic search of people who have done this before and are not concerned about the outcome because they have the kind of employer whose name makes outcomes manageable. Elias knew who they rode for before they reached him. Everyone in the county knew Ambrose Pike's men. They had a specific quality, not individually remarkable, but collectively, the quality of men who understood that their authority derived entirely from someone else's money, and who had accepted this arrangement because the money was sufficient. The lead rider pulled up beside the wagon. "Mornin'," the man said. "Morning," Elias said. "You come in from the East Road?" "South, Ward Ranch, 12 miles. The rider looked at the wagon, at the loaded supplies visible through the open front, at Elias. "You see a young woman on your way in? Dark hair, pink dress?" Elias thought about what he had seen. He thought about it for the half-second available to him and made the only decision that felt honest within that half-second, which was that he did not yet know why she was hiding, and therefore did not yet know whether helping these men would be the right thing or the wrong thing. And until he knew, the burden of proof was on them. "My wife's in the back," he said. "She's not feeling well. Motion sickness." The rider looked at the wagon. Elias did not look at the canvas flap. He looked at the rider with the steady expression of a man who has answered a question honestly and is waiting for the next one. From behind the canvas came a sound, a small shift, then silence, and then Rosemary Bell pulled the flap aside and looked out at the riders with the composed expression of someone who has just heard what was needed of her and has decided to provide it. Her hair was slightly more disheveled than before. Her cheeks had color in them that had not been there 60 seconds ago, which he would later understand she had achieved by pinching them. She looked at the riders with the mild impatience of a woman who is unwell and being interrupted.
"Elias," she said, "are we going?" She put a specific emphasis on the name, not performing familiarity, just using it the way you use a name you have used 1,000 times. "In a moment," he said. He looked at the rider. "Is there something else?" The rider looked at Rosemary. He looked at Elias. He looked at Rosemary again. Then his eyes went to her feet. She was wearing shoes that did not belong in a supply wagon, cream-colored, with small buttons up the side, the kind of shoes that belonged at a ceremony. The rider's expression changed. "Those are some fine shoes for a sick woman," he said. Elias moved the wagon before the rider finished the sentence. Not dramatically. He simply said, "She dressed before she felt it coming on," with the flat conviction of a man who is not arguing, and flicked the reins, and the horse moved because horses move when you tell them to, and the wagon was in motion before the rider had decided what to do about the answer. They let him go, for approximately 30 seconds. Then he heard them behind him, not chasing, but following, which was different and in some ways worse because following had patience and chasing had urgency, and patience was harder to outrun. He turned the wagon at the feed store corner without signaling and took the alley behind the mercantile and came out on the old mill road that ran parallel to the main street and was not, technically, a road anyone used in October because the ruts were deep and the surface was uncertain. The wagon handled it. He came out on the east fork of the mountain road and pushed the horse to a pace that was not comfortable but was sustainable, and after 20 minutes, he could not hear following anymore. He did not stop. Rosemary came forward from the back of the wagon and sat beside him on the box without asking. Her cream shoes were already ruined. She was holding her small bag in her lap and looking at the road ahead with the expression of someone who is past the crisis and is now managing what comes after it. "They'll take the main road," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why we're on this one." "Where does this road go?" "Eventually, my ranch, by way of a longer route through the North Valley." She was quiet for a moment. The Wyoming October was holding on tight. The aspens were all gold now, and the sky had that sharp, thin blue that tells you winter is tired of waiting. "I should explain," she said. "You should," he said. She looked at her hands. "My name is Rosemary Bell. My mother was a seamstress in Red Willow. She died in March." She paused. "She left debts, more than I knew about. The man those riders work for, Ambrose Pike, he held the notes on most of them." "I know who Pike is," Elias said. "Then you know what he wanted in exchange for the debt," she said. He looked at the road. "The wedding was today," she said. "This afternoon, at the Pike Ranch." He was quiet for a moment. "How long were you planning to stay in my wagon?" "Until Red Willow was behind me," she said. "And after that?" She looked at the mountains ahead. "I didn't have an after that yet," she said. He drove. She sat. The wagon moved through the Wyoming afternoon, and neither of them said anything for a while, which was not uncomfortable, which surprised them both.
She told him the rest during the first hour on the mountain road, thoughtful. Not all at once, in the way things come out when you are moving through a landscape that has no audience, and the person beside you is not filling the silence with questions. Sighs. Pike had been in her mother's life before her mother died. He had provided credit at a time when the seamstress business was slow and the winter had been hard. The credit had seemed reasonable. The rates he had quoted were the rates her mother had reported to Rosemary, which were the rates of a man doing a favor. They were not the rates on the actual notes. Rosemary had found this out 2 weeks ago, going through her mother's papers. She realized the numbers she'd been told were a lie. Pike hadn't lent her mother money. He'd twisted a rope around her neck. He'd stacked interest upon interest, a math trick that turned a small debt into a mountain of paper no seamstress could ever climb over. He engineered it, so the only way out was to give him exactly what he wanted. "He engineered it," she said. "Yes," Elias said. "You're not surprised. Men with Pike's money and Pike's patience don't usually end up holding a seamstress's debt by accident," he said. "What was he after?" She was quiet for a moment. "My mother's property, a small piece of land on the south edge of Red Willow. My grandfather left it to her. There's a creek running through it. She looked at the mountains. Pike owns everything on both sides of that creek except her piece. Without it, he can't get water rights to the new section he's been building. Elias drove. He thought about water and land and the specific patience of a man who plans in years rather than months. He thought about a seamstress who had been offered credit at reasonable rates by the most powerful man in the county and had not known until it was too late what the credit was actually for. He thought about a young woman in a pink dress with ruined cream shoes sitting on the box of a stranger's wagon because the wedding that was supposed to solve everything had been engineered by the same man it was supposed to save her from. "The property," he said. "Is it yours now?" "It should be," she said. "My mother's will leaves it to me. But Pike says the debt transfers with the estate and that the property is the only asset sufficient to cover it." She looked at her hands. "I don't know enough about law to know if that's true." "It's not entirely true," he said. She looked at him. "My brother was a lawyer before he came out here," he said. "He used to talk about debt transfer law." He looked at the road. "The notes would have to specify the property as collateral at the time they were written if they don't." "I don't have the notes," she said. "I saw them, but I didn't take them. I didn't know I would need to." He nodded slowly. "Out here," he said, "the law is mostly whatever the man with the most money says it is. That's how Pike's built his whole life. But my brother used to say that if you can get a thing in front of a federal marshal, Washington's paper rules still carry weight, even against a cattle baron." She looked at him like that mattered more than he realized. He drove. The Wyoming afternoon was getting colder, and the road was beginning to climb, and somewhere behind them, on the main road, Ambrose Pike's men were making the same calculation that he was. The passes would close in 3 to 4 weeks, and the Ward Ranch was on the other side of them. But the men behind them weren't going to be the biggest problem of the night. Up in the mountains, something a great deal less patient than Ambrose Pike was already coming down. It came that evening, as storms in the Wyoming mountains come, without the warning that would have been useful, with the specific authority of weather that has decided. Elias saw it building in the north and pushed the horse harder, and did not make it to the ranch. He made it to an old line cabin he had used during summer grazing, a single room, stone fireplace, wood stacked outside by habit every October. The specific foresight of a man who understood that the mountains were not interested in his plans. They got the horse into the lean-to beside the cabin. They got the wagon alongside it. They got inside. Rosemary had not complained once on the road. She had not complained about the speed, or the cold, or the ruined shoes, or the fact that she had eaten nothing since morning. She sat in the cabin on the single chair while Elias built the fire, and looked at the room with the expression of someone taking inventory and finding it manageable. "There's food in the wagon," he said. "I'll get it." "I'll get it," she said. "You have the fire." She went out in the storm and came back with the salt pork and a portion of the flour and the coffee and 2 of the blankets, and she had the pork cut and in the pan before he had the fire fully established, which he noted and did not comment on. They ate. The storm came down hard outside. He had expected something. Questions, perhaps, or the emotional aftermath of a morning that had required a significant amount of composure to survive. What he got was a woman who ate her supper and cleaned the pan with the practical efficiency of someone who had been taking care of herself for a long time, and who then looked at the fire and said, "Thank you for not asking questions on the road." "You were telling me," he said, "on your own timeline." She looked at the fire. "My mother used to say that the right person asks the right question at the right time," she said, "and the wrong person asks all the questions at once." He looked at the fire, too. "What was the right question?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "She never said. I think she meant you'd know when you heard it." He thought about that. He thought about a man who had learned to live alone in a house that had been built for more than one person, and who had stopped asking questions because there had been no one to ask. He looked at Rosemary across the fire. "Did you eat this morning?" he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "That was the wrong question to ask 6 hours ago," he said. She almost smiled. It was the first time. It arrived and started and didn't quite complete, and then it completed. And it changed her entire face. And Elias Ward looked at the fire because looking at her directly when she smiled like that was something he was going to need to work up to. Before we go on, I want to ask you something different today. Most of you listening right now are somewhere in the middle of something. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're cooking or folding laundry, or sitting on a porch watching the evening come in. That's what Forever on the Frontier is for. If this story is keeping you company today, leave a like. It means more than you know. And tell me in the comments, what are you doing right now while you listen? I genuinely want to know. Now let's get back, because the snow is coming down and the pass is closing, and Rosemary Bell is going to see the Ward Ranch for the first time. The storm cleared by morning and they reached the ranch by noon. Rosemary did not say anything when she first saw it. She got down from the wagon and stood in the yard and looked at the house. A solid structure, well built, bigger than it needed to be for one man, with a porch that ran along the front and windows that had been cleaned recently, and a kitchen garden that had been put to bed for winter with the specific care of someone who intended it to produce again in spring. Elias had banked the beds with straw and old manure, the kind of work that meant nothing to look at now, but meant potatoes and carrots, pulling through the deep freeze and coming up first in April, before anything else in the valley. She looked at the garden, thoughtful. "You do this yourself?" she said. "My brother planted it," he said. "I keep it." She looked at the house. She looked at him. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said. 4 years ago, he said. It was not the answer to what she had said, but it was the answer to something, and she received it as such without asking for clarification. He showed her the house. It was clean and organized in the way of a man who understood that disorder cost time, and time was not a thing you wasted on a working ranch. It was also missing the particular quality of a place that has been inhabited by more than one person for a while, the adjustments that happen when someone else's preferences have been incorporated into the arrangement. She saw this immediately. She did not say anything about it. He showed her where she could sleep, his brother's room, which had been unused for 4 years and which he had kept the way he kept everything, clean, functional, unchanged. She put her bag on the chair beside the window and looked at the room. "I'll pay for my keep," she said. "You don't." "I will," she said. "I'm not a guest. I'm someone who needs to stay until the pass opens. And while I'm here, I'll earn it." He looked at her. "The ranch runs with one person," he said. "I know," she said. "But it would run better with 2. He held her gaze for a moment. She held his. He looked at the window, at the snow coming down outside, at the pass that was going to close in a week and not open until April. "There's a mare in the east stall," he said. "She hurt her left foreleg last week. I've been managing it, but a second pair of hands would help." "I'll look at her in the morning," she said. He nodded. He went to start supper. She unpacked her bag, which contained, he would later discover, a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, a small sewing kit, and the 2 documents she had managed to take from her mother's papers before she ran. The documents she had not known yet were going to matter. And as the snow began to bury the world outside, a different kind of quiet started filling that house, the kind that slowly began to speak. The pass closed on November 2nd. Rosemary was at the Ward Ranch for the winter. This was not a romantic situation in the sense of being easy. It was 2 people in a house through a Wyoming winter, which was its own kind of test. The ranch required constant work. The cattle needed feeding, and the water needed breaking, and the wood needed splitting, and the equipment needed maintaining. There were days when neither of them said more than what the work required, and days when the conversation ran through supper and into the evening. She was good with the mare. This surprised him in the way that things surprise you when you have made an assumption without realizing you had made one. She handled the injured leg with the focused patience of someone who understood animals, not the hesitant approach of someone unfamiliar, but the direct, confident approach of someone who had grown up around them. "Your mother had horses?" he said. "My grandfather," she said. "I spent summers with him."
The mare was sound by December. Rosemary also, quietly and without announcement, repaired things. The curtains in the kitchen that had been torn at the hem since before he noticed they were torn. A section of the porch railing that had been loose since spring. A split in the leather of the harness that he had been meaning to address since September. She did not tell him when she had done these things. He found them done. He started leaving notes. Not letters, practical notes. The kind that operated as conversation between two people whose schedules did not always overlap. The wood on the north side needs another cord before February. The mare's leg is holding. There's salt pork left if you want it for supper. She answered them the same way. The curtains in your brother's room needed it too. I started it. She found a loose stone in the east wall of the barn. I mortared it. Used the kit on the shelf. She was right that the ranch ran better with two. Not because she worked harder than him, or because she changed how he did things, but because having someone else present changed the quality of the work itself, gave it a different weight, the weight of something being built rather than merely maintained. He sat with this one evening in January and thought about it honestly. He thought about a house that had been built for more than one person and had been occupied by one for 4 years. He thought about his brother, who had designed the house with the specific forward thinking of a man who expected things to fill it. He thought about notes left on the kitchen table and supper eaten across from someone, and the specific laugh she had when the cat did something unexpected, and the way the ranch felt in the mornings now versus the way it had felt in October. He put his coffee down. He went to check on the cattle. He thought about it for the rest of the winter. He came in February, not with restraint, with the full weight of a man who had been waiting since October and had run out of patience. 6 riders, himself included, arriving at the Ward Ranch at mid-morning when the snow had settled and the sky was the flat white of a Wyoming winter that has decided to stay. Elias was at the barn when he heard them. He came out. He stood in the yard. He did not reach for the revolver, because reaching for it first was not how he handled situations he had not yet assessed. Pike was 60 years old and had the look of a man whose physical presence had once been considerable and whose authority had long since become sufficient that the physical presence was no longer needed. He looked at Elias with the specific expression of someone who considers himself the most important element of any situation he enters. "Ward," he said. "Pike," Elias said. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The door of the house opened. Rosemary came out. She stood on the porch and looked at Pike with the expression of someone who has been afraid of something for a long time and has, during a Wyoming winter spent repairing curtains and caring for a mare, arrived at the end of the fear. Pike looked at her. "Rosemary, come down." She did not move. "My contract." "Your contract," Elias said, "was with a debt that was manufactured to create exactly this situation, and you know it." Pike looked at him with the patience of a man who has been winning arguments for 30 years through the weight of his position rather than the merit of his logic. "You have no standing in this matter, Ward." "I have standing," Elias said, "in anything that happens on my property." Pike looked at his men. He looked at Elias. He looked at Rosemary on the porch. "Rosemary," he said again. His voice had changed, softer, which was worse than hard. "Your mother's debts are real. The property is legally at risk. I have been patient. I am offering you a resolution that protects your family's land." "You built the debt," she said from the porch. Her voice was entirely steady. Elias stepped forward. He stood between Rosemary and the men on horseback.
"She can have pretended to be my wife to get out of that town," Elias said. He looked at Pike. He looked at the 6 riders. He looked at Pike again. "But she will never need to pretend anything in this house." Determined. Pike looked at him with the patience of a man who has faced down obstruction before and has methods. "Ward, this is not your situation." "She's on my property," Elias said. "That makes it my situation." Firm. "You are one man." "He's not." The voice came from the road. surprised. 3 men from the valley, Tom from the Henderson spread to the east, the Hargrove brothers from the north, men who had seen 6 riders moving through the snow and had made the calculation that 6 riders moving together in Wyoming territory in February meant something was happening that they wanted to be near. Pike looked at them. He looked at his own men, who had the expression of men recalculating whether their employment was worth the specific situation developing in front of them. He looked at Rosemary on the porch. She came down the steps. She reached into the collar of her dress and drew out a folded paper that had been kept against her skin since October, worn soft at the creases from being carried and reread. She was 22 years old and had spent 4 months in a house with a man who left notes on the kitchen table and had not once asked her for something she was not ready to give, and she was done being afraid of Ambrose Pike. "You're right about one thing, Pike," she said, her voice shaking a little but her eyes steady. "I don't have the original notes." She held the paper up so it caught the light. "But I have your letter to the creditor in Cheyenne, dated 3 years back, the one where you tell him what rates to write down and what rates to actually collect." Pike went very still. "And Sarah Wren has the copy," Rosemary said. "The one that's already on its way to the territorial marshal. Reverend Cole helped her write the letter that went with it." Pike looked at the riders. He looked at the valley men who had appeared on the road. He looked at Elias, who had not moved from between him and Rosemary and showed no intention of moving. He looked at Rosemary and at the paper still held steady in her hand. He looked at his riders again and saw, in the specific way of a man who has built his authority on other people's compliance, that the compliance was ending. One of his riders had already shifted his horse to the side, putting distance between himself and the center of the situation. Another was looking at the road. "This isn't finished," Pike said. "Yes, it is," Elias said. Pike turned his horse. He rode. His men followed, not all at once, but in the way of men choosing a direction and finding it was not the one they had been pointing. The yard was quiet. The Wyoming February was white and still around the Ward ranch. Tom called over from the road. "Everything all right, Ward?" "Yes," Elias said. "Thank you." Tom nodded. He rode on. Rosemary stood beside Elias in the yard, the letter still in her hand. She was shaking slightly, not from cold. "He'll go to the marshal first," she said, "before the marshal comes to him." "Yes," Elias said. "Will it hold?" she said. "Sarah's documents, the letter." "It'll hold," he said. He looked at the road where Pike had gone. "It'll hold because it's true. True things hold." She looked at him. He looked at her. And then he went to check on the cattle, because the cattle needed checking, and because there were things he was going to say, and he needed to say them correctly, and he was not ready yet, but he was almost ready.
He said it that evening. Not dramatically. It was not that kind of evening. It was the kind of evening that comes after a hard day, when the hard part is over, and the house is warm, and supper is done, and the specific relief of a crisis resolved has settled into the particular quiet of 2 people who have been through something together. She was at the table with her mother's Bible. She read it in the evenings sometimes. Not devotionally, exactly. More the way you read something that belonged to someone you loved and that carries them in it. He sat across from her. He looked at the table. "The pass opens in April," he said. "Yes," she said. "I can take you anywhere you need to go when it does." He looked at her. "Any city, anywhere you want to start over. The property in Red Willow will be yours. The marshal will see to that. You could sell it or keep it. Either way, you'd have something to go forward with." She held the Bible in both hands. "Is that what you're planning to do?" she said. "Take me somewhere in April?" He looked at the table again. "I can take you anywhere," he said. "I just don't know how I'd come back to this house if you weren't in it." She was very still. She looked at him with the brown eyes that had been doing the calculation of a woman assessing situations since October, and had at some point during the winter stopped assessing and started knowing. "Elias," she said. "Yes." "I repaired the curtains in your brother's room," she said. "I know." "And the porch railing." "I know." and I have been leaving notes on the kitchen table for 4 months." "I know," he said. "Because I live here," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the steady certainty of a woman who has spent the winter arriving at something and has arrived. "I live here," she said again, more quietly. Not a question, not a statement about the present, a statement about intention. He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, both of them, still holding the Bible. She held it back. The Wyoming February was outside, white and still and enormous. Inside the Ward Ranch, the fire was warm and the supper dishes were done, and a woman had repaired the curtains in a room that had been unused for 4 years and was living in it and intended to keep living in it. "Yes," he said, "you do." And that was all either of them needed to say. They were married in May. The pass had opened in the 3rd week of April, and the world had come back, the green rushing up through everything, the creek running high with snowmelt, the aspens going from bare to the first pale leaf. They went to Red Willow in the wagon, the same road, the same covered section in the back that was now carrying a proper wedding dress that Sarah Wren had made, a simple thing, cream-colored. Rosemary hadn't wanted something to look at, she'd wanted something she could live in. A dress practical enough to wear out to the garden or out to see the mayor after the vows were said. The town of Red Willow had changed since February. Ambrose Pike had left the territory in March after the territorial marshal's investigation had confirmed what Sarah Wren's documents showed. He had left quietly, in the way of men whose authority evaporates when the source of it is removed. His property had begun the process of being assessed for back taxes and disputed claims. The county was going to be occupied with that for a while. The small church was full. Sarah Wren sat in the front row with the expression of a woman who had kept a secret in a drawer for 6 months on the chance it would be needed and had been vindicated in the keeping. Rosemary's property, the creek piece, her grandfather's land, her mother's inheritance, had been returned to her clear title in April. She had decided not to sell it. She walked down the aisle of the Red Willow Church in the cream dress, and she looked at the man at the altar, who had found her in his wagon and had driven the wrong road through the mountains, and had left notes on a kitchen table all winter, and had stood between her and 6 riders, and had said she would never need to pretend in his house. And she thought about a whispered request in a covered wagon in October. She had asked him to pretend. He had never pretended anything. Not once. Not the way he drove out of town, not the protection he had offered, not the notes on the table, not the hand over hers at the kitchen table in February. None of it had been pretending. The vows were simple. After the ceremony, outside the church in the Wyoming May, Sarah Wren appeared at Rosemary's side. She looked at Elias, who was talking to Tom from the Henderson spread. She looked at Rosemary. "Your mother," Sarah said, "would have found a way to make it happen earlier." Rosemary looked at Elias. "She would have left him more notes," she said. Sarah laughed. Rosemary laughed. And Elias, from across the churchyard, looked at his wife laughing with Sarah Wren in the Wyoming spring and thought, "I found her in my wagon. I drove the wrong road. I came home." He walked over to join them. He took her hand. She held it. And the Wyoming May was around them, green and enormous and beginning, and everything was exactly and completely right. Elias Ward found a woman hiding in his wagon and drove the wrong road through the mountains. He did not plan any of what happened next, but he made a series of small decisions, each one unremarkable on its own, that added up to everything. He decided not to ask questions on the road before she was ready to answer them. He decided to leave notes on the kitchen table instead of conversations she wasn't ready to have. He decided to stand between her and the men who came to his yard in February because she was on his property, and therefore it was his situation, and because some things are simply that clear. And he decided to say the truest thing he knew how to say, that he could take her anywhere, but he didn't know how he'd come back to the house if she wasn't in it. That is not a grand gesture. That is a man who learned, over the course of a Wyoming winter, what the house was for. She had asked him to pretend. He never pretended a single thing. The lie that got them out of town became the truest life either of them had. Some things start as survival and become something else entirely. Pay attention to what they become. May God bless each and every one of you who listened today. Until next time, keep riding.